Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 1st of April 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. This particular article appears on page number 13. The title of the article is Tough Times for NBFCs. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian economy. Along with the banking system, the NBFCs form an integral component of the financial market in India. Over a period of time, the share of loans given by the NBFCs to the corporate entities has increased. However, due to the recent crisis related to the IL&FS, the share of credit given by the NBFCs has reduced. It is in this particular aspect, this particular article here has analyzed various aspects related to the problems faced by the NBFCs with respect to the raising of money as well as decline in the share of credit given by the NBFCs. Now the facts and figures which are given in this particular article are not important with respect to your prelims examination. However, what is important is the various problems faced by the NBFCs in India. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us first understand about the various problems faced by the NBFCs. And secondly, since the NBFC sector was in news with respect to the recent crisis at the IL&FS, it is expected that certain basic questions can also be asked with respect to the non-banking financial companies. So in second part of the video analysis, we'll understand certain basic details related to the non-banking financial companies, such as what exactly are the NBFCs, the differences between the NBFCs and banks, and who regulates the NBFCs in India. Let us start analyzing these aspects of the article. The non-banking financial companies essentially give loans to various kinds of projects, such as the infrastructure projects, real estate projects, housing projects, etc. And in order to give away the loans, the NBFCs mainly rely on two financial instruments. These instruments are corporate bonds and commercial paper. So by issuing corporate bonds and commercial papers, the NBFCs borrow money from the financial market, and the same money which is borrowed is in turn given in the form of loans for various kinds of projects. Now the basic difference between the corporate bond and commercial paper here lies in the maturity period, wherein the corporate bond essentially refers to the long-term borrowings by the NBFCs, whereas the commercial paper refers to the short-term borrowings by the NBFCs. Now this particular financial model of the NBFCs is quite different from that of banks. This is because unlike the NBFCs, the banks are predominantly dependent upon the depositors' money in order to give away the loans. However, the NBFCs are dependent upon the corporate bonds and commercial papers in order to give away the loans. So what exactly happened during the IL&FS crisis? Now this particular company is one of the biggest NBFC which is basically involved in financing various kinds of infrastructure projects. Now this particular company basically relied on the commercial paper in order to raise short-term borrowings. And through these particular borrowings, the IL&FS company gave long-term loans to various kinds of infrastructure projects. So what exactly the IL&FS company did was, it raised short-term loans from the financial market, but it gave long-term loans for various kinds of projects. Now the main problem which arises here is that the gestational period of the infrastructure projects in India is quite long. That is to say, the infrastructure projects take a minimum of 15 to 20 years to get completed. Due to this particular problem, the IL&FS company was not in a position to repay back its short-term borrowings. Subsequently, the IL&FS company defaulted on its repayment obligations of the commercial paper. Now, such a problem faced by IL&FS company is also referred to as the asset liability mismatch. We call this as asset liability mismatch because on its asset side, that is towards the project financing, the loans which it had given were long-term loans. However, towards its liability side, that is the borrowings, it had relied on the short-term borrowings. That is why this problem is referred to as the asset liability mismatch. In this regard, let us understand the problems faced by NBFCs after the IL&FS crisis. The default on the repayment of commercial papers shows that there is increased risk of investing in commercial paper. Accordingly, the credit rating of commercial papers has been downgraded by various credit rating agencies in India. So, because of the increased risk in the commercial papers, the rate of interest of the commercial papers has increased in the recent times. Now, this clearly shows that the cost of borrowing by the NBFCs has increased. In this regard, the article has highlighted that since the cost of borrowing by the NBFCs has increased, the amount of loans given by the NBFCs has reduced in the recent times. Apart from that, you all must be aware that the Indian economy is presently facing the liquidity crunch. So this shortage of liquidity is even affecting the various NBFCs in India. So having understood the present problems afflicting the NBFC sector, let us understand certain basics related to the NBFCs. The non-banking financial companies, as the name suggests, these are the companies which are registered under the Companies Act. Now, this is quite different from that of the banks in India because all the banks are listed under the second schedule of the RBI Act 1934. However, the NBFCs are registered under the Companies Act. Further, depending upon the nature of operations undertaken by NBFCs, they are categorized into two types, that is, the deposit taking NBFCs and the non-deposit taking NBFCs. Now, coming to the differences between the banks and NBFCs, now you all must be aware that the banks in India can accept both demand deposits as well as the fixed deposits. The demand deposits here basically corresponds to the savings account as well as the current account. So the banks can accept both demand as well as the fixed deposits. On the other hand, the NBFCs are barred from accepting the demand deposits. They can accept only the fixed deposits from the people. Similarly, unlike the banks, the NBFCs cannot issue checks. This is because they are not part of the payment and settlement system in India. And the last difference here is with respect to the deposit insurance facility. That is to say, when you deposit the money in the banks, your deposit up to rupees 1 lakh is insured by the bank. However, such kind of insurance is not available for the deposits with the NBFCs. So these are the three main differences between the banks and NBFCs. Now coming to the different categories of the non-banking financial companies. The first category is the asset finance company. As the name suggests, these companies give loan in order to buy various kinds of assets which may be automobiles, tractors, cars, etc. The second category is that of a loan company. Now the working of loan company is similar to a asset finance company. However, the nature of operations is much more broader than the asset finance company. That is to say, a loan company may give loans not only for buying of assets, but it may give loans for any other purpose. The third category is that of the investment company. As the name suggests, this particular company makes an investment in the securities issued by the companies across India. The infrastructure finance company provides finances for various infrastructure projects. The microfinance institutions provide loans of lesser amount to agriculture as well as the MSME related activities in India. The stock brokering companies accept money from the people and that money is in turn invested in shares as well as bonds. The housing finance companies provide for finances for construction of houses. And the last two categories are the chit fund companies and the Nidhi companies. Now, even though both chit fund companies and Nidhi companies are similar, the basic difference here lies in the fact that the chit fund companies can only accept the deposits but they cannot give the loans. However, the Nidhi companies can accept deposits as well as give loans. So these are the different categories of NBFCs in India. However, it is to be noted that the list which is presented here is not an exhaustive list. This is only an indicative list of different categories of NBFCs. Apart from that, the RBI has recently decided to merge these three NBFCs into a single category known as the NBFC Investment and Credit Company. This particular merger took place because the nature of operations carried out by these three NBFCs were similar to each other. Hence, in order to reduce the regulatory burden, the RBI has now decided to merge all these three NBFCs into a single category known as the Investment and Credit Company. Now, with respect to the regulation of NBFC sector in India, it is to be noted that not all the NBFCs are regulated by the RBI. Only those NBFCs which are basically dealing with borrowing and lending of money are regulated by RBI, whereas the other NBFCs are regulated by their respective sector regulator. Now, for example, since this particular company is involved in lending and borrowing of money, it is regulated by RBI. Similarly, the infrastructure company is also regulated by RBI. The same can be said about the microfinance institutions. However, if you look at the stock brokering companies, they are regulated by the capital market regulator, that is the Security Exchange Board of India. When it comes to housing finance companies, it is regulated by the National Housing Bank. The chit fund companies in India are regulated by the respective state governments. And lastly, when it comes to the Nidhi companies, all the Nidhi companies are regulated by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in India. So, with respect to the regulation of NBFCs, it is to be noted that different categories of NBFCs are regulated by their respective sector regulators. So, these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Rural Job Crunch. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian Economy. Now, this particular article is based upon the analysis of the leaked Periodic Labour Force Survey report which is published by the National Sample Survey Organization. Now, this particular article has analyzed the employment to population ratio in the rural and urban areas in India, and accordingly it has highlighted that the employment to population ratio has shown significant variations. Further, it has also highlighted that in the year 2017-18, the rural employment to population ratio has declined by a higher margin as compared to the urban employment to population ratio. It has also highlighted that the share of salaried employees in the rural areas has increased. However, the quality of jobs has remained poor. Now, the facts and figures which have been highlighted in this particular article are not important with respect to your upcoming prelims. Apart from that, it is unlikely that UPSC would ask questions based upon the leaked data of the Periodic Labour Force Survey report. However, since the Labour Force Survey report has been in news from last 2 to 3 months, one can expect questions related to the conceptual understanding of the Labour Force Survey reports in India. For example, questions may be asked with respect to the various terminologies used in the Labour Force Survey. Similarly, questions may also be expected with respect to the publishing agencies of the Labour Force Survey reports, and more importantly, how the employment and unemployment in India is actually measured. Hence, with respect to your upcoming prelims, let us focus on having a conceptual understanding related to the labour market in India. Now, in case of India, there are mainly three official Labour Force Survey reports. Now, these reports are the Periodic Labour Force Survey report, the Payroll Reporting, and the Quarterly Employment Survey. When it comes to the Periodic Labour Force Survey report, this is published by the National Sample Survey Organization, which is working under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, before coming out with a Periodic Labour Force Survey report, the National Sample Survey Organization used to publish the Employment and Unemployment Survey, which was carried out every 5 years. However, the main problem with such an employment survey was that it was carried out every 5 years and it was not a regular survey. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, the NSSO has now started coming out with the Periodic Labour Force Survey report. As part of the PLFS report, the National Sample Survey Organization carries out a quarterly survey of the labour force in the urban areas. Apart from this, it also carries out an annual survey of the labour force in both rural as well as urban areas. Further, you need to note that the PLFS report covers the employment in both formal sector as well as the informal sector. Now, coming to the second labour force survey report known as the payroll reporting. Now, this particular survey report measures the formal employment by using the records of the Employee Provident Fund Organization, the Employee State Insurance Corporation, as well as the National Pension Scheme. So based upon the number of people who are joining these social security benefits of the government, the Central Statistical Organization comes out with a payroll reporting. So one main difference between the PLFS report and the payroll reporting here is that the PLFS report covers the employment in both formal sector as well as the informal sector. However, the payroll reporting data covers the employment only in the formal sector. And the second difference here is that the PLFS report is published by the National Sample Survey Organization, whereas the payroll reporting data is published by the Central Statistical Organization. Now coming to the next survey known as the Quarterly Employment Survey. Now this particular survey is published by the Labour Bureau, which is working under the Ministry of Labour and Employment. Now with respect to coverage of this particular employment survey, this measures the employment situation only in the selected non-farm industrial sectors, which means to say it does not measure the employment in the agricultural sector, and it confines itself to measurement of employment only in the industrial sectors. Wherein the Quarterly Employment Survey measures the employment situation in 8 major sectors. Some of these sectors are manufacturing, construction, trade, transport, education, health, etc. So with respect to upcoming prelims, you should note the coverage of these labor force survey reports as well as who publishes these labor force survey reports. Now coming to the approaches used for measuring the employment and unemployment in India, there are two major approaches which are used. The first approach is known as the usual status approach, and the second approach is known as the current weekly status approach. Now both these approaches are used by the National Sample Survey Organization in order to measure the level of employment in India. Now under the usual status approach, the reference period is of 365 days preceding the date on which the survey is carried out. Now for example, if the National Sample Survey Organization is measuring the level of employment in the year 2018, then the reference period will be the year 2017, that is the 365 days preceding the date of the survey. And under the usual status approach, a person is classified as employed if he or she is employed for a major part of the year. Which means to say, if a person is employed for a major part of the year, then he or she is classified as an employed person. The second approach is known as the current weekly status, wherein the reference period is of 7 days preceding the date on which the survey is carried out. So the basic difference between the usual status approach and the current weekly status approach here is that under the usual status approach, the reference period is of 1 year, whereas under the current weekly status, the reference period is of 7 days. And under the current weekly status, a person is said to be employed if he or she is employed for at least 1 hour on any of the day during the week. So the second difference between the usual status approach and the current weekly status approach here is that under the usual status approach, a person is said to be employed if he is employed for the major part of the year, whereas under the current weekly status, a person is said to be employed if he gets employment for at least 1 hour on any of the day during the week. Now having understood the list of official labor survey reports as well as the approaches used for measuring the employment and unemployment, let us now understand certain basic terminologies associated with the labor force in India. Now coming to the first term, that is the labor force. The labor force of a country basically includes all those people who are either working as well as those people who are looking out for work. That is to say, the labor force includes all those people who are both employed as well as unemployed. The second term is the workforce. As the name suggests, it includes all those people who are employed. So if one wants to know the number of unemployed people in a country, it can simply be measured as the labor force minus the workforce. Similarly, in order to measure the unemployment rate, it can be measured as the total number of people who are unemployed divided by the total number of people in the labor force into 100. And this employment rate is always defined in terms of percentage. Now coming to the next term, that is the labor force participation rate. The labor force participation rate is basically the percentage of working age population of a country who are either working or looking out for work. So essentially, if you look at the formula for the labor force participation rate, it is defined as the labor force divided by the working age population into 100. The next term is employment to population ratio. Now the employment to population ratio is essentially the percentage of working age population who are working, and it is defined as the workforce divided by the working age population into 100. So the difference between the labor force participation rate and the employment to population ratio lies in the fact that the labor force participation rate takes into account the labor force, that is the number of people who are either employed or looking out for work, whereas the employment to population ratio takes into account only those people who are employed. And the last term is the worker population ratio. This refers to the number of persons who are employed per 1,000 persons. So one important aspect which one must know with respect to worker population ratio here is that unlike the labor force participation rate or employment to population ratio, which takes into account only the working age population, the worker population ratio takes into account all the people irrespective of their age. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to the labor force survey reports in India. Further, based upon the conceptual understanding of the labor force survey reports, I hope you will be able to read and understand these graphs related to the periodic labor force survey report. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Election Manifesto. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian Polity and Governance. Now, this particular article talks about the election manifesto. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand certain basic details related to the election manifesto. In a democratic country, every political party needs to disclose the schemes and programs which it would implement if voted to power. Such a disclosure enables the people to make informed choices as to which political party they would want to vote upon. Hence, in this regard, every political party in India issues a document which basically includes the poll promises which it makes to the electorate. Now, this particular document is referred to as the election manifesto. Now, the election manifesto of the political parties includes the policies and programs which it would implement if it is voted to power by the people. Now, such an election manifesto should not contain any kind of provision which goes against the constitutional ideals. Apart from that, the election manifesto should also be consistent with the Model Code of Conduct. Now, in order to improve the process of elections in India, recently the Election Commission of India has come out with certain detailed guidelines on the election manifestos. Now, you all must be aware all the political parties are prohibited from conducting campaigns during the last 48 hours before the polling, and such a prohibition has been provided under Section 126 of the Representation of People's Act 1951. Now, such a restriction has been added in the Representation of People's Act so as to ensure that the political parties are not able to sway the voters during the last 48 hours before the polling. Now, if you look at the election manifesto can also be considered as a kind of campaigning for the elections. Hence, ideally, the political parties should not be allowed to release the election manifesto during the last 48 hours before the polling. Hence, in this regard, the Election Commission of India has recently amended the Model Code of Conduct, and such an amendment now prohibits the political parties from releasing the election manifesto during the last 48 hours before the polling. And such an amendment has been carried out by the Election Commission based upon the recommendations given by the Umesh Sinha Committee. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to election manifesto. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 8. The title of the article is The Arrogance of the Ignorant. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 under the subsection Environmental Conservation. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. Over a period of time, there has been rapid degradation of forest in India. So who is to be blamed for this rapid degradation of the forest? Is it the tribals, or is it the multinational companies which are involved in construction of various infrastructure projects in the forest? Over a period of time, the government has built up a perception that the tribals living in the forest are responsible for the rapid degradation of the forest. It is precisely because of this particular reason the government has been forcefully evicting the tribals from the forest area in the name of the wildlife conservation. And on the other hand, the government has been diverting the forest land for the construction of various infrastructure projects. So, according to the government, it is the tribals who are responsible for the degradation of the forest and not the multinational companies. It is in this particular regard, this article here has highlighted that even though rapid economic growth should be the goal of any economy, however, such an rapid economic growth should not come at the cost of the environment as well as the rights of the traditional forest dwellers. Accordingly, the article has highlighted some of the problems faced by the tribals living in the forest areas in India. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us look into the problems raised in this particular article. The first problem highlighted in this particular article is with respect to loss of indigenous knowledge of the tribals. The tribals have been living in the forest since ages, and because of their close association with the nature, the tribals have developed their own local knowledge. Such a local knowledge is unique to their culture as well as the society. For example, the tribals may have developed their own medicinal system in order to cure certain diseases. Such traditional and indigenous knowledge is not documented, rather, it is passed from generation to generation, either through word of mouth or through any of the cultural rituals followed by the tribals. Now, the development of such indigenous knowledge can be cited as an example of sustainable development. That is to say, it shows one of the best example of the coexistence of human along with the nature. Now, one unique aspect of the indigenous knowledge is that it enables the tribals to live sustainably in the forest. That is to say, it enables the tribals to live in the forest in harmony with the nature. Apart from that, such an indigenous knowledge is far more superior to the formal education which is normally imparted in schools, colleges, etc. For example, in the year 2004, when the tsunami hit Andaman and Nicobar Islands, it eventually led to death of large number of people. Surprisingly, the oldest living tribes in India, that is Jaravas, as well as the Onjas tribes of Andaman and Nicobar, were able to withstand the tsunami. Now, the reason for the survival of these tribes can be attributed to their traditional knowledge. Now, this is because the warning of incoming tsunami was judged by the animals living in the forest. Hence, in order to avoid the danger, the animals migrated to higher elevated areas. And these tribes here have a knack of predicting the natural disasters by observing the animal behavior. So, when these tribal communities observed that the animals were migrating to higher elevated areas, they also migrated to higher elevated areas in order to avoid the danger. So it was precisely this particular traditional knowledge which enabled the Jaravas and Onjas of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands to withstand the havoc of the tsunamis. Now, such kind of traditional knowledge the tribals have developed by their close association with the nature, and it is considered to be far more superior to formal education because such an education cannot be imparted in schools or colleges. So, when we forcefully evict the tribals from the forested areas, it not only adversely affects the environment, it also leads to the loss of indigenous traditional knowledge. Apart from that, the article here has also highlighted that there has been growing instances of biopiracy wherein the multinational corporations have been misusing the indigenous knowledge for their commercial purposes. Now, one example of biopiracy can be associated with the patenting of the neem. Traditionally, Indians have been using neem for a number of reasons, and this can be considered to be a form of a traditional knowledge of Indians. However, in early 90s, a multinational company located in US biopirated this traditional knowledge of India, and accordingly, this multinational corporation applied for a patent with the European Patent Office. Similarly, as we have discussed, the tribals have developed their own traditional medicines. So there have been growing instances of the biopiracy of these traditional medicines by the multinational corporations. So this clearly shows that the multinational corporations are misusing the traditional knowledge developed by the tribals. And more importantly, whatever profits these multinational companies are making, they are not being shared with the tribal community. Thirdly, the article highlights that at least the Supreme Court, which is considered as the guarantor of rights in India, should have protected the rights of tribals. However, what has happened recently is that when the claims of the tribals were rejected under the Forest Rights Act, the Supreme Court ordered for the eviction of such tribals from the forest. So the article has highlighted that even the Supreme Court has failed to protect the interest of the tribals living in the forest. And even though the Supreme Court has now decided to put a stay order on the eviction, the article has highlighted that the Supreme Court has done so only because of the public protest. Lastly, the article has highlighted that the construction of infrastructure projects such as dams in environmentally fragile areas would not only lead to environmental destruction, but it would also lead to a displacement of large number of tribals. In this regard, this article concludes by saying that we must allow the traditional forest dwellers to live in their habitat, and the development in India should not only be faster, but at the same time, the development model should be sustainable as well as inclusive. That is to say, the development model should take into account the interest of all the communities, and the development must not be at the cost of the environment. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears as a lead article on page number 8. The title of the article is Seeking the Next Frontier. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 3, Technology, under the subsection Developments in the Field of Science and Technology. Now, this particular article here is discussing about the Mission Shakti, which is the anti-satellite missile test recently conducted by India. Now, various aspects related to the anti-satellite missile test has been comprehensively been covered in our DNS dated 28th of March 2019 by Mangal sir. So you can go to this particular DNS in order to comprehensively understand various aspects related to Mission Shakti. Apart from discussing various aspects related to Mission Shakti, this particular article here also discusses about the ballistic missile development program of India. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand certain basic details related to the ballistic missile development program of India. Let us first understand as to what exactly is the ballistic missile defense system. Now, as the name suggests, this particular system basically acts as a shield against the incoming ballistic missiles which are launched from the enemy territory. Hence, such a ballistic missile defense system enables India to protect itself from the incoming missiles launched from the enemy territory. And such a missile defense system is mainly used for defending India's territory and not for attacking the foreign territories. Wherein the ballistic missile defense system mainly consists of three components. These components are the early warning and radar system, the integrated command and control center, and the interceptor missiles. Now, the working of the ballistic missile defense system can be understood by looking at this particular diagram. So, when an enemy country launches a ballistic missile towards India, the launch of such a missile is in turn detected by the long range radar situated in India. And upon the detection of the incoming ballistic missile, the integrated command and control center in turn fires a interceptor missile. And such an interceptor missile in turn destroys the incoming ballistic missile. Now, with respect to India's ballistic missile development program, it basically started in the year 1999 after the Kargil war, and it is developed by the DRDO. Further, India intends to put a two-tier defense system involving the Prithvi Air Defense System and the Advanced Air Defense System, wherein the Prithvi Air Defense System would be able to intercept the missiles at a higher altitude of around 50 to 80 km. On the other hand, the Advanced Air Defense System will be able to intercept the missiles at a lower altitude of up to 30 km. Now, the development of ballistic missile development program by India has certain strategic advantages. Firstly, as you all must be aware, India is facing threat from both state as well as non-state actors in the Indian subcontinent. Hence, the development of ballistic missile development program would enable India to protect its territory from the incoming ballistic missiles. Secondly, India has explicitly come out with the no first use policy of nuclear weapons. So, in case if an enemy country launches a nuclear missiles towards India, India would be able to protect itself by launching the interceptor missiles. And lastly, it can also be argued that the development of ballistic missile development program would provide a strategic edge to India by protecting the key military installations. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to ballistic missile defense system. Now let us take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 8 as an editorial. The title of the article is Kartarpur Focus. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, International Relations, under the subsection India and its Neighborhood. Now recently in the month of November 2018, India and Pakistan committed to build the Kartarpur corridor for the benefit of Sikh pilgrims. Now, in our DNS dated 23rd of November 2018, we had covered various aspects related to the Kartarpur corridor. For example, we had discussed that the Kartarpur corridor would be built from the Dera Baba Nanak village in Gurdaspur to Kartarpur Gurudwara in Pakistan. Further, we had also discussed about the Kartarpur Gurudwara. Now, this particular editorial here has highlighted certain concerns of India with respect to building of the Kartarpur corridor. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand the concerns raised by India with respect to Kartarpur corridor. Now, some of the concerns which have been highlighted in this particular editorial include: firstly, the editorial has highlighted that there has been undue delay in finalizing various aspects of Kartarpur corridor, such as how many tourists should be allowed to visit the Gurudwara, as well as how long the tourists should be allowed to stay at the Gurudwara. The second concern here is that recently Pakistan has decided to include some of the pro-Khalistan individuals in the management of Kartarpur Gurudwara. Hence, because of this particular reason, India has raised concerns that Pakistan may use this particular Kartarpur corridor in order to fuel the separatist movement in Punjab. Lastly, Pakistan has been insisting that the opening up of Kartarpur corridor would provide an opportunity for India and Pakistan to have a comprehensive bilateral dialogue on other issues as well. However, India has clearly stated that it is not ready to talk to Pakistan on other issues unless Pakistan stops funding the terror elements on its soil. Since this particular article related to Kartarpur corridor was already discussed in our DNS video, let us now take up a question for your practice. Now you can pause this video and try to find the answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is: consider the following statements with regards to the Kartarpur corridor. The first statement here is it connects the Gurudwara Darbar Singh Kartarpur to Paonta Sahib. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the Kartarpur corridor connects Dera Baba Nanak in Punjab to Kartarpur Gurudwara in Pakistan. The second statement reads as: the present Kartarpur Gurudwara was established by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, as we have discussed in the earlier DNS video, this particular statement here is correct. So, if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is B, that is 2 only. Now, based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The first question here is: consider the following statements related to the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library. The first statement here is it seeks to protect the ancient knowledge of India from biopiracy by documenting it electronically. Now, as we have discussed, some of the multinational companies are misusing the traditional knowledge developed by India, wherein these multinational companies are biopirating this traditional knowledge and then they are applying for the patent. Thus, in order to prevent the biopiracy by the multinational companies, India has started an initiative known as the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library in the year 2001. As part of this initiative, we are documenting the entire traditional knowledge of India in the digital format, and this would prevent the multinational companies from filing for patents for the India's traditional knowledge. So if you look at the first statement here, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as it is an initiative of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because it is the initiative of the Ministry of Ayush and it has been developed in collaboration with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. So the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library is jointly developed by the Ministry of Ayush as well as CSIR. So if you look at the statements which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is 1 only. Now coming to second question, the question here is consider the following statements with respect to the differences between the NBFCs and banks. The first statement here is the NBFCs can accept only the demand deposits and not the fixed deposits. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the NBFCs can accept only the fixed deposits and not the demand deposits. The second statement reads as all the NBFCs are regulated by RBI. Even this particular statement here is wrong. This is because the different categories of NBFCs are regulated by their respective sector regulators. The third statement reads as the deposit insurance facility is available for NBFCs. Even this statement here is wrong. So if you look at the question which is given here, the question reads as which of the statements given above is or are incorrect. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this question is D. Now coming to third question, the question here is consider the following statements related to the payroll reporting data. The first statement reads as it measures the employment only in the formal sector. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as it is measured by Labour Bureau, Ministry of Labour and Employment. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the payroll reporting data is measured by Central Statistical Organization, which is working under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this question is A, that is one only. Now coming to the fourth question, the question here is consider the following pairs of economic terms and their meaning related to labor force surveys. The first term here is labor force participation rate, which is written as labor force divided by total population into 100. Now this option here is wrong. This is because the labor force participation rate is defined as labor force divided by the working age population into 100. Similarly, if you look at the second option here, it reads as employment to population ratio, which is defined as the workforce divided by total population into 100. Even this option here is wrong. This is because the employment to population ratio is defined as the total workforce divided by the working age population into 100. Now coming to third option, the third option reads as worker population ratio, which is defined as number of persons employed per 1000 persons. As we have discussed, this option here is correct. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is 3 only. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.